I intended to do a stream about this earlier in the day, but I was caught up with some things, and yeah, it is what it is. Earlier today, I think at about maybe 9 a.m., uh, just very early in the morning, there was a young man who requested to be given permission to leave his class. We're kind of at a standstill, but I thought it was really interesting that I had a subscriber who pointed out or gave this regulation last week when we had the one in Texas, which I have an update on as well, that there would be a shooting, another school shooting within a month. And I had told him my only area of disagreement would be that possibly it would happen sooner. Let me say hello to O'Donohue. Um, and one of the worst parts about doing these various shootings, let me say hello to Envoy as well, is that you get to a point where you start thinking you're just regurgitating the same thing over and over. But I have to say, I actually came on a little bit more optimistic than most times because if any of you guys, I know it, 7 days is a very long time. Remember the last school shooting in Texas. Um, so just like with most Republican politicians, I have to say it, um, they have kind of this reluctance to do things about firearms. And sure enough, there was a shooting in Texas at this church back in November. Thoughts and prayers, yada yada yada. And I criticized Governor Abbott over that because he was known to have affiliations with the NRA. Well, I don't know what happened, but between last Friday and this Wednesday, when he made his announcement, he must have grown a set of balls. He announced several ways in which he is going to, or rather willing to do things relating to gun control. And when I read that, the hair on the back of my head just stood up. I couldn't believe it. You know, you, I almost thought I was in some kind of bizarro world to actually get a politician to, notice the consistency of various mass scale incidents happening in their state and adapt their policies based off of that. It was just surprising. Let me say a little Dirk. So yeah, I really hope he does something. It seems like he will. Even that horrible Florida governor, Rick Scott, who I'm not entirely familiar with the governors of Florida, but I can tell you he's somewhere in the bottom tier. Even he was planning on doing something after Parkland, and I was annoyed by the fact that it took so many shootings in his state under his reign. We had the airport one at the start of last year. Who could forget the Orlando one almost 2 years ago? Say hello to JMO. So also let me say hello to Brian. Give some greetings all around. Uh, it's just very disappointing that you have almost this running theme where it takes several shootings in a politician's state while they're in office to get them to back even the slightest of changes. And that's a running theme I've noticed with candidates of both parties. When they get in office, they just don't want to make any changes to how they adapt to things. Let me say a little, respond on what he says. I guess the lives of children matter barely. They matter about as much as you know that whatever the paycheck is. Like I said, I am in no business to sit here and talk up the Democrats or make them look any better than Republicans, but gun control is one of the few issues where, for the most part, that they have had the basic idea correct. There needs to be something, uh, some law or bill put into place afterward. That's one of the few small things I can go and give them credit for. Okay, JMO, that's off topic, but whatever. Dirk says, wasn't the last shooting at a school like 2 weeks ago completely numb from this? No happening at a national level. No, the last shooting at a school was last week. I'm kind of surprised you forgot about it already. Although we do get so many of them, they just kind of start. I think, and I mentioned this in the other stream. If JMO will check it out, he's the only person in here that I don't recall seeing in the other one. That it feels like the news nowadays is just shooting, uh, sexual assault allegations, something that Trump did, and somebody dies, or some which will be the subject of tomorrow's stream, and if I'm able to do what I want to do tomorrow, so we'll see. But I'm saying that it feels like when you watch this, a lot of people say repeat yourself. I'm kind of forced to when the same problem and mistake isn't addressed. Take, for example, if I make the argument that we should, I don't know, pay attention to sewers, for example, just the fact that they can spill into the water that people will use to drink and for all this other stuff and contaminate it. Um, and I just start making a stream for every time there's some story about, oh, this person got contaminated, now they have this disease and that disease. And I kept saying the same thing, if we need to have tighter controls on the environment, you would get tired of that after a while because you say, well, why does he keep talking about this over and over again? Um, but I can't, I don't dictate the news, and I've tried to switch the language up a little bit, but the core theme is always going to be the same of do something in relation to it. Uh, Envoy says, what is there to look to? Morale is just so low when you watch the news. Yeah. That's one of the worst things about any kind of news coverage of any event where a person can, sit back and just watch something. Like, for example, in making the comment I did about Abbott earlier in this stream, you wouldn't hear that on television. Um, and they would say, oh, that's crude and that's rude and yada, yada, yada. But it's entirely having to do with the fact that you have seen this man go through multiple shootings during his reign as governor and just sit back and go, I'm not going to bother the NRA. I'm not going to mess with them. And you get tired of that. So obviously when you get upset with something happening over and over and bodies just lining the streets, you become less prone to just sit back and have this really reserved and, timid feeling. And, I kind of have this thing now with these politicians where I know that, I'll never have any conversation with them. So might as well say whatever you want. Envoy says, I still think something on the level of 9/11 will happen. It just feels like we're reaching a boiling point. Well, here's the thing. Not in one day, if that's what you're referring to, but something when it comes to guns, something on the level of 9/11 has already happened. There's a statistic that with all these various shootings and killings of people by these firearms, every 3 months aligns with the number of casualties from 9/11. Go look that up. Literally a quarter of the year, or rather, I think it's 33% of the year sees as many casualties by gun deaths as there are for 9/11 victims in that one day in that terrorist attack. So, we have our own wave of domestic terrorism that people don't like to acknowledge. I mean, I had this user who was trying to use an example for the, focusing on the. I didn't want to bring it up. I get so tired of having to argue back and forth with people over this stuff. But he was trying to justify his opinion on this one issue by saying, Americans or Caucasians or whichever term you'd want to use to describe a majority of us are going to worry more about terrorism than white on white crime or things that are domestic. And, even if that's true, as far as people have done that in the past, it doesn't mean it's right. And also, we don't do that at the behest of ignoring a majority of even the smallest of incidents will still get some coverage somewhere. If it's on a website, maybe not the local news, but we don't pretend it's not going on. Just in general with crimes we have. Envoy says, I can see like maybe 500, 700 people dying in one moment. Mass armed killers, kind of like Vegas, but more killers who have access to deadly rifles. I see that as well. I'm just saying that there's been loads and loads of casualties, and they don't get talked about. See, what becomes very frustrating is that people seem to have this idea that if you, and I've mentioned this in the other stream, have someone who has mental disabilities, that by itself is dangerous, when in reality that person's resources contribute to the total amount of damage and, in a lot of cases, bloodshed they can do. If I, for example, was some crazy person and all I have is my hands, I can sure inflict some damage, but that's a much smaller amount than someone who has a bazooka or a missile, and it's just insane up there. Again, they don't want to acknowledge that it's two for two. You can't just say, "Oh, it's just mental illness." The thing in Vegas should have scared everybody because if you look at the biography of Stephen Paddock, the guy was a college graduate, was wealthy, didn't have any trouble with women, which I can't say for some other shootings we've seen in the past, and still just lost his mind. And then there were people that were saying because his father was a career criminal who left his family when he was a child. It was because he didn't have his daddy around. That's what caused him to make him that way. And just sit there watching this and going, that's a man that was, what, 6 years away from being 70, and he still needs his daddy. Dirk says, true lives matter. Situations push people to the worst. Yeah, but again, the thing in Vegas should creep people out, in my opinion, should creep people out the most about shooters in the modern era, because this is a person who, again, did not fit any of the profile. He wasn't young. He was established. He was wealthy. Was, you know, very much had what people would want in most cases. CP says, how convenient the mental illness excuse, or the mental ill excuse. I added a couple of more words on there, or letters. Yeah, I think it was one of Trump's speeches in reference, there's so many of these things, to one of the shootings where they pointed out he never said gun control at all. It was just mental illness, mental illness. You would think he was referring to some incident where a person ripped off their clothes and stood outside. Okay, Dirk says if daddy issues play in shootings, then there's a lot of people that are going to be potential shooters rather. Uh, well, we've obviously talked about the higher likelihood of a person who comes from I don't know if it's just a single parent home or a single mother home that is more often to go and do things, but uh, again, that's with the disclaimer of saying not everyone is going to turn out that way. It's just to suggest there is slight validity in that claim, even if, again, we are cognizant of the fact it doesn't automatically mean you'll be that way. But that was, I hope most people were joking about that, because if they weren't, you have to remember to yourself, this is someone who went decades without his dad, and all of a sudden just, so it's creepy. Likelihood that there's a chance that a rich person would do that as well. I mean, I think a lot of the damage he was able to do came from the fact that he was wealthy. And I guess I'm still kind of taken aback by the fact that it's been only, what, 8 months since that happened, or 7 months, and the entire case has just completely disappeared from the airwaves. No one talks about it. No one says, hey, that was the deadliest shooting by a single gunman in U.S. history ever. It was completely dropped. Post November, December, you didn't hear anything else about it. I was just shocked because, again, we're talking about someone who was outside the realm of all of these different common patterns, and no one thought to just keep talking about it. All I heard was bump stocks and this woman that was supposedly wired a bunch of money, and it was over. So JMO says these shootings were by people who felt disenchanted. Yeah, but what I'm trying to convey to you is that oftentimes there are recurring themes when you look at the life of several of these shooters. Just like, you go to the Lubby shooting where the guy took his truck in 1991 and drove that into that Texas, I think it was a restaurant, just started shooting all these women, talking about, was it worth it? That was over disenchantment with women. The guy used to go around in his car and make little noises toward women to try to argue back and forth with them and say they were gross or whatever. Just all kind of little misogynist rhetoric that, unfortunately enough, had some validity in it in terms of just being genuinely disenchanted with people, but, taken to a level that was much too far, obviously. So I'm saying that when you have those patterns, and then someone comes along that doesn't match most of those, it's a little, it should be disturbing. I don't think people get it though. Uh, I'm kind of disappointed a little bit that this was intended to be about the Indiana shooting, but I really don't know much about it. I looked these articles up. They talk about what exactly led up to it, which was just him walking out and grabbing these two firearms. Three people being in their conditions, and it doesn't have really anything to it. So one could argue, I'm glad it didn't turn out to be a bloodbath, but I'm kind of disturbed that they're keeping all this information out of here. Let's see what else. Okay, Envoy stopped commenting. Him and his ex-wife are battling over custody of the patio. Okay, Dirk says not much need to describe after knowing the intentions from the first 100 shootings in the past. um, well, yeah, but sometimes they have different things you can point out and discuss. It's just it really feels as though we're in some kind of on some news Ferris wheel. So, for example, if you're a person that again is doing a 9 to 5 or just living life, a lot of times you'll say, "Oh, this is bland. I'm doing the same thing every day." But it genuinely feels as if you're getting the same news every couple of days. It was a Friday when we had the other story about the shooting. Um, just every time you turn on the news, it seems just the same stories. And you have to also remember, these are just the ones that make national headlines. Go type in shooting on Google News, and you'll get loads and loads that probably won't be thought of past the day they happened. Dirk says yes, but seems like a loophole that is with Congress or Senate to try and change this. Yeah, well, when the majority of Congress is bought out by the NRA, it almost feels impossible. That's why Congress is such a low approval rating. The politicians have brains that are diametrically opposed, or rather vote in ways that are diametrically opposed to their constituents. Even a lot of those Southerners would still agree with some basic form of of regulations. Brian says another troubled teen. I bet. I have no idea. They would not give any information. And, when these shootings happen, they're very quick to start digging into backgrounds and past. So it's kind of bizarre to me they would wait over and over and over again. Let's see what else is here. Also, Brian, you're by speculating, you're being very discriminatory. There are a lot of troubled teens. Envoy was a troubled teen until he met his ex-wife. Then he was a disturbed man. She took him from a troubled teen to a disturbed man. She evolved him. I think he actually left. Oh yeah. Okay. Uh, it's just had two handguns. Yeah, holding both of those, looking like something out of a Rambo film. Not machine guns. Well, you can still have damage with most of these weapons. I admit, the more advanced forms, you want to keep those just. And that's another thing I could never understand. People that call themselves being opposed to gun control act as if anytime you mention that it's the extreme of I'm going to take away every single firearm, and I want to make sure that no one has any access to weapons ever. When my thing has been, why do you need uh, bazookas and machine guns and AR-15s and all? Just what is that? So I don't get it. Brian says guns are for killing. It doesn't matter about the size. I don't know of any. I don't know of any peaceful ex- story on the news that had to do with someone firing at another person. Envoy says you can't change the precious amendment. It's my America, damn it. You know, the saddest thing is that based off of what I've seen from the education system within the United States, I have a feeling a lot of people who call themselves being supporters of the Second Amendment and, oh, don't mess with it and yada, 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 they might forget that it's a law and most laws can be repealed if you get enough backing for it. Obviously, in the current capacity of Congress and how divided people are, you wouldn't be able to do that. But I wouldn't mind getting rid of that. You have to remember when that was first put into place. What was that, in the early 1800s? I have to go look it up, but they didn't have the weaponry that they have now. So just like with the First Amendment, people say, "Oh, I can say anything I want." Yeah, when that was first conceived, they didn't have the internet where someone could tell you they hope you die because you said something about a celebrity that they didn't like. People weren't able to log onto an account with no picture and tell you, "I hope you take your final breath tonight." All that nonsense. Well, CP, the purpose of the amendments was to reflect changing times within American culture, and the founding fathers were completely privy to that. That's why that system is allowed to function the way that it has. Um, but people don't seem to recognize that. Oh. Splendora says bazookas and machine guns are illegal. AR-15s are weaker than many hunting rifles. Guns should not be banned based on them looking scary. I don't recall ever saying that. Again, this is that thing people like to do where they run in there, say something that's excessive or whatever, it can be counter to what I'm saying, and then jump out. That's the new policy. Envoy says this is America. Most people are galvanized by patriotism and the distaste of other countries, viewing America as the best thing around since sliced bread. Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole separate stream about all the problems with the U.S., not even just domestically. You have us support, we call ourselves the governing body of democracy, and then we're supporting 70% of the world's dictatorships under both Democrats and Republicans. We're bombing 8 countries. There's loads of things you can go after us for. People who run around with them are scary, yeah. No, a weapon by itself is not the problem. It's the individuals wielding the weapon, and because we don't have the capacity to cast a window into someone's soul, we don't know if that person is, in the right mind one day and out of the loop and sick of everything the next day. I didn't say you said that. I'm referring to Bill Clinton's assault weapons ban. Well, I already told you that I was no fan of his when they went through catalogs and they banned weapons based on how they looked and not what they did. Yeah, again, that's a policy. Go watch the George H.W. Bush video I did on why he's underrated. It's already said in there that I think every president after him was fairly awful or mediocre at best, and that was one of the reasons. Uh, okay, Envoy says I need to start making a list of topics we should tackle in streams. LO, like the death stream about mortality, America and its troubled patriotism. Well, tomorrow's stream, if I'm able to do it, is relating to death. Let's say hello to Casey. What else is here? Yeah, Splendora, please do not believe that. I would hope I know you've seen a number of my content. You already know I don't play partisan politics, and I've only really gotten behind the Democrats on gun control because they show a willingness to at least try something. Now, the Clinton thing of banning weapons off of how they looked instead of what they did was absurd. But again, I'm telling you that it's that endorsement on their part is again due to to their willingness to do something. Now the actual policy and the ramifications of we can get into afterward, but Republicans, it just feels like they're in office, they do random tax bills or whatever, and just things to mess with military spending, and then a shooting happens, and they act as if they've never heard of one before, and they go thoughts and prayers. And you ask them what's the solution, they go. So I get tired of that. It's literally every shooting. Like they've never heard of these before. It's brand new. And then they appeal to the religious right who eats that stuff up about thoughts and prayers by saying, "Oh, forget any practical solutions with laws and bills. Let's pray to the sky god." They can shove the envoy. Those are bad words. Those are those are against the what do you call it? The rhetoric we're supposed to distill. By the topic of the death stream, seems like how many by because we hit them with. Uh, oh no, it won't. It won't refer to. It'll be on something. How do I say this? It's on the topic of death, but it's not about the causes of it, rather than, what you do before. That's. I think it has its own tone. You'll likely be more interested in. Uh, it's patronizing and insulting. How do you feel about the people who blame video games for the reason why people mass shoot? Well, it's completely asinine because, so for example, there was a Simpsons game that came out on the Xbox many, many moons ago, where one of the interactive features was being able to drive a car. Played this game when I was a little boy. No one would ever say, you drove that car in that video game really well, so that means you must be able to drive a car. Let's get you your license tomorrow. That wouldn't come up in anyone's thoughts. So effectively, with the supposed simulation of shootings that these video games had, people were able to cast a blame on something that they saw many engaging with that they themselves had no, because people who were middle aged, for example, in the 90s had no experience with video games. Okay, let me respond. Splendora says, note the last time we're talking about they were talking about including the ammunition that those weapons use too. And the same ammunition can be used by many other guns that would not be banned, though if their ammunition is banned, then they are nothing but bludgeoning weapons, so the Dems have a history of overreach. Okay, again, I'm not saying they don't. The Republicans have a history of no reach. So again, either option, pick your poison. I'd rather get the one that at least acknowledges this problem. Splendora says the uniform masses will understand what it means to ban the ammo too. I mean, is there any? I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just telling you that I'm trying to get what you're saying or attempt to comprehend it. Always says I remember people having outcries because of the violence of Grand Theft Auto and how it's affecting young children. The game clearly has a red circle on it saying 18 plus. So all those soccer moms like Sarah Palin can suck it. Uh, yeah, I guess I would concur. What I find so amusing, and this is something you're also going to notice on just websites. So, for example, if you are to go on YouTube, there are videos that have a mature rating. You can't go on there, you can't watch it unless you have an account. Now, any 5-year-old or 7-year-old that knows how to type can make an account and say that they're 18 and watch the video, and then be turned off by seeing whatever it is, and then tell the parent, "Oh my God, the video was so nasty, and this person was cursing, and this person," and then it's the fault now of the uploader based off of our little, retarded rules when it comes to the effects of content. It's the fault of the person who created it rather than the parent who didn't watch what their child was seeing. Uh, to go out and be blamed for the ramifications. Let's see. I think I missed someone's comment. Yeah, I hope I gave Dirk a clarification where stream is not going to have to do with gun control. It'll have to do with just things that cause death. Homeboy says, "Whoa, don't say the word retard. The PC community will knock on your door with pitchforks." I mean, go back to the beginning at like the first 2 or 3 minutes of the stream. You already heard what I had to say about that governor. So, again, that's only having to do with the fact that you sit here in office in your little wheelchair, which it could be a regular chair for all I care. I already know someone's gonna say, "Oh, you're picking on him because he has polio," whatever. But you sit here in your comfy office while all these people get shot up in different parts of the state, and then you put out a public statement and show up after everyone's dead, talking about solutions and change and progress and ways of fixing policy and yada yada yada. So I have a very low tolerance for anything having to do with him. And I'm glad that his political career will seemingly be over after this election cycle, which he will win because the people of that state will. It's like Mussolini era Italy over there, just like my state. If you're at one particular party, they'll back you anyway. Doesn't matter who the nominee is. Mm. If we're describing them. Casey says it should be the parents' responsibility for restricting content in any media form from their children, but God forbid parents actually have to do their job and control their children in America. Um, yeah. No, really, in a lot of these instances where you have these young shooters, you have a lot of times. One of the first things they do is look into the parents. I remember in Columbine, one of the boys, I can't remember which one it was. He had loads of firearms just stored up in his, I guess, part of the house, and his dad supposedly was completely oblivious to it. And then in the circumstance of the Parkland shooting, you had both the adoptive mother and adoptive father deceased. So, they were unable to continue to control that, or at least quell the demons in that student or Cruz or whatever his name was, who was, by the way, getting fan mail for what he did, because we have depraved people who are not too far off from those that actually go out and kill someone. But yeah, I agree with that sentiment. I think, I've mentioned before if you go back and watch the stream on the parents dooming the lives of their children, somebody made the argument of, once you get to a certain age, your parents shouldn't be responsible. But a lot of times the lack of attention, or in some cases, things that that child engaged in that didn't have to do with the parent, provided they actually, were able to be involved but chose not to, can have long-term consequences on that person. Okay, Envoy says, "Quell the demons." It seems like a lot of people have demons in them and inner darkness. Yeah, and it's really scary. There's I think Top 15s, if anyone's familiar with that channel, they did a video on the most scariest things or something. One of the subjects was that you're always going to have serial killers, and you're always going to have these people that get this mentality where they can take a life at the drop of a hat, and have no remorse from it. And in some cases, it's a person who just has that from the jump. In other cases, it's someone that just gets fed up with things and wants to seek their revenge. And it's happened to people of all different ages and sizes and races. So it's a disturbing thought. Really, all you can do is just keep trying to arm yourself with ways of preventing it from directly impacting yourself. Okay. Apparently, everyone's tapped out. I think O'Donohue said one thing and then he just ran off. That was the end of his participation. He became so disillusioned with having to say things. Now Splendora's only here so he can tell me about how much the Democrats suck. They do suck. I'm not saying they don't, but we'd be here all day. Okay, Dirk agrees with Envoy. He's nodding his head like a weeble. So we're all in agreement, going, yeah, yeah, it sucks. Um, Really, what's even scarier is that you have people who, as I mentioned before, are able to stay in power from the fact that there is a collective bargain of this is part of. Let me read what Wayne says. Oh no, I hope it's not that same thing where someone comes in and then they throw out something and then run out right after uh, catching me off guard. But I'm going to make my point. You have a lot of people who, for example, are going to vote for Abbott, a person who's had multiple shootings under his reign. And if they do think about gun control or guns at all, it's going to be the reverse. They're going to say it's a good job our governor didn't mess with our firearms because, if you get one of those liberal Democrats and they're going to go over there and mess with our things, um, and they just completely tune it out. They go, screw all those people that got murdered, screw everyone that died. Nope, gotta keep my gun. So, uh, Wayne says, well, now we know there is no solution. It's a part of American culture now. I don't know what this shooting in particular did to spark that, but I mean, again, the Vegas. Anytime you have one that just completely overpowers the others in terms of its casualties, I would think that's the one that makes you go, "Wow, it just reached this new low." But it is what it is. Again, I don't see how this one was really that any more significant than most. Splendora says, "I'm just trying to show you that it's hard to expect or to negotiate with the Democrats and educate them and do not debate in good faith. Trying to show the other perspective. Yeah, look, I can get behind you. Have and this is something I mentioned before. Um, well, two school shootings in 1 week. We've had what tens in a month, so it's again still not. And even if we have two in 1 week, we've had multiple where they've killed more people than all of those shootings combined. So I still don't get how this is any more impactful or telling than others. But yeah, Splendor, I get the standpoint of what you're saying. And again, this is way better than what we've seen in the past. People have this thing about, oh, you don't want anybody to disagree. It's how it's done. See, I know that Splendor is going to come in here and write me 7 or 8 messages, and then when I stop speaking back, start post, oh, I've won, I've triumphed, I sure showed him. Oh, forget that. So I appreciate what has been seen from your behavior. Envoy says, if there was a school shooting extremely near your area, let's say a school was 15 minutes away from you that got shot up, would you go to your school the next day? I doubt it. So I'd want them to at least tell me something they've done to make this different. If Pandora says I never say anything like that, and I wouldn't. No, I'm not referencing you. I'm just again go and watch We Are in Dark Times too, and you'll know what I'm talking about. I think most of us who have any regular attendance to the streams will be able to catch that reference. So it really is a breath of fresh air when someone comes in there and goes, "Hey, this is my perspective." Look, I appreciate that much more. Always says, "I know I won't. I'll be at home eating a bowl of Frosted Flakes and watching Rick and Morty on Netflix in bed." CP says I wouldn't go back. I would just study for the GED. And Wayne says, "No, I did." Was that movie? What is Iron Man gonna come protect me at the school if I go and see that film? Is that why that's relevant to the stream? So I don't get it. Casey says metal detectors and security guards can only do so much to protect people. Ultimately, there needs to be a greater gun control, and the mentality of a lot of Americans has to change. I don't know what you mean by mentality. Again, I genuinely don't know. You can elaborate on it, but if you mean that this whole thing of, oh, let's do gun control, you're gonna take with my gun. And yeah, I agree. At least hear the other person out. Pandora says put in metal detectors hire 2 security guards. Retire. They have to. That is literally what I said in the other stream. Okay. Spandora says transparent backpacks are a good idea. That would creep me out, man. Imagine I bring one of my Playboy magazines and people are able to go and look up in there. Yeah, Envoy. In response to that question, we literally have a there's a video from about a year and a half ago about my last day of high school. But people just just run in the stream and try to divert the subject instead of actually going and looking the stuff up. It's too difficult. CP says there were metal detectors and security guards in my school. I lived in the hood. Very rare to get school shooting in the hood. Yeah, that's because they're shooting all over the other, all over the everywhere else. They leave the schools alone. Uh, well, they knew what they were dealing with. CP. I guess Pandora Gaming says plenty of schools already require transparent backpacks. They do exist. Oh, I'm aware that they're around. Uh, I'm just saying that from the standpoint of, I mean, it's kind of like saying, hey, let's have a baby version of the Patriot Act. You're gonna you're gonna wiretap my backpack by being able to see all of what's in there. Okay, Casey says from personal experience, having metal detectors and security guards in my school when I was younger didn't stop a thing. Yeah, there's an argument to be made with that as well. Dirk says I purposely bring lewd objects to show through my transparent objects. And then CP is laughing at something. I don't know. Man Down Gamer says high paid people again. People just randomly show up in there. I've never seen this person before. High paid ex military guards. Uh, Dirk puts back. He's correcting an earlier post. Man Down says every school. CP says the school was safe though. I'm sure it was. The area not so much. Okay, Casey says we had a kid sneak a gun into school and try to shoot it up. The only thing that stopped him was his own stupidity and the gun didn't fire. Sounds about right. I mean, a lot of these kids can't even pass history tests, much less plan out a shooting. So it's not that surprising that didn't come to fruition. You go and look at their level of success and determining other things, and you don't get surprised when the grander schemes don't play out. Let's see. Wayne says, "Why not just put electric collars over the kids if they pull out a gun, pull their and this thing just evaporated before me, pull their key out of the keyhole associated with that person, and bam, the problem solver. Gotta admit that'd be a really good move." Hashtag Belko experiment. As Casey said earlier when I referenced the mentality of Americans, I mean, there needs to be a change in how people think about the rights to bear arms and on gun control. I already told you, man, that Second Amendment and the argument for it is outdated. I mean, if they want to be contemporary with if they want their position to go back to when it was contemporary, they need to go and dig up James Madison and ask him about how he handled school shootings when he was in office. Oh wait, he didn't. Casey says earlier. Oh, I already read that. Dirk says good movie, which okay, going. Yeah, Dirk is participating in the comment review for the streams. People go in here and they'll ask themselves why are they talking about this movie when they're supposed to whatever. Case says in addition, the kids need to change how they interact with each other because a lot of these shooters were victims of bullying. Dirk says they want the protection a small government can't bring you. Evidently, by having a gun, I guess. Man Down says it's more of a okay. Whatever you say. Again, we already went over the astute problems with just trying to blame mental illness for everything. No, I do not have one. I would link it if I did. Splendora says, why is the Second Amendment argument outdated when we have one of the lowest rates of gun crime in the world and we artificially inflate the number to look worse by including suicides? Because they're used to murder people even if they do it willingly. Uh, Dirk says, mental ill, get out. All right, we're about to go into that territory where it's me and the person go back and forth. Oh, I just think a lot of the Constitution has problems. Um, you have people who will make the claim that I have the right to bear arms, and I mentioned earlier that that right was instilled at a time when you didn't have mass shootings, be they in a school or in some other environment. And if you can't see that, I can't explain any further. Uh, so that's that. Dirk says if that's true, I would suspect, and many as well. Um, CP says, oh, okay. Casey says a gun is only the instrument used to execute these acts of violence, and that as long as the urges to commit violence in this fashion exist, then it will continue. I agree, but we have to figure out how to stop people who have these problems from having the weapons. A lot of liberals will conclude if all of the weapons are gotten rid of, um, then they're not able to do it, and that kind of would be true. But you also have people who will break the law and not openly give up their weapon or try to hide it. We might get to a point where we just say, well, we need to have some kind of system where every weapon built from one point or another just has sort of make them like smartphones. You can track them. So if the person says, I don't have this, then you can actually know if they have it or not. And no one should tell me that it's a violation of privacy if the our phones are allowed to violate our privacy all the time. Uh, okay, CP says when there were muskets. Dirk says people don't want to elect those who want to fix the laws. Pretty much. Now we've already talked about the vast differences in ideology between people and Congress members. And the scariest thing is that because people go through there's a number of factors into why certain individuals get elected. In some cases, you have individuals who are put into office because someone associates that party with whatever set of beliefs without even looking at the actual positions of that person. That's why you've had many people say that someone will just vote for a Democrat no matter who it is. Doesn't matter if it's Obama or Clinton or Daffy Duck or Tom and Jerry. It just it'll go on forever. Dirk says many shootings are in places that allow guns like a car. I don't even know anymore. Yeah, they're all over the place. Casey says, look at China where there were 33 killed and 130 injured in a knife spree. There was no gun there, but the urge to commit mass violence was still there. Look, I don't think that automatically crime will, drop entirely by this happening. Really, we're getting to a point where people just need to stay at their home and not bother being in places for any long span of time. That's how disturbing things are now. Where just you have to go to harder lengths to protect yourself. 200 years ago, you wouldn't have had to have a bomb shelter. But in the current capacity of weapons getting stronger and more dangerous, and in the hands of becoming more and more easily accessible, you just have to make the adjustments. They could make planes cost, I don't know, $1,000, and people would start having flybys where they just go up to your house and just start gunning down there. So, man down. Oh my God. It's also a poverty issue. All right. That's why that the Mr. Rich Paddock in Vegas shot up that place. He was sad over his assets. You know, I've spoken about that before with the claims that these crimes are committed by people who don't are impoverished. I just think it's a lot of people who don't have things to do. That's from seeing people who were in poverty be able to, get themselves out of it. But that's still on another topic. CP says those 3D printers can make plastic guns, I believe. Yeah, you get one of those, and then you're gonna have to get a warehouse for all those new firearms you've manufactured. So I can completely get behind that idea. All right, anyone else saying anything? Um, so yeah, my arm is getting tired. I'd like to thank those who have participated. I'll have another stream up probably. It might be in the morning, definitely by the afternoon. Um, so we've talked about the dangers of these weapons, the dangers of the minds of the people who were behind them. Um, and look, you can't solve every problem. I just say, oh, let's get rid of all the weapons because you have people who won't obey the law, and it will rightfully be seen as punishing those that will. Um, and I haven't lost the belief that a majority of people who have guns are not out of their minds and willing to blow your brains out the drop of a hat. The thing is, they're given a really hard act to follow with the way things are structured now. And I've advocated before. My position has been that if they remove the lack of security at these schools and actually put weapons in the hands of those who can use them in tactical and skillful ways um, to protect those who are young or just can't defend themselves against some weapon, I think that would be a better solution given how things are. You're always going to have the opposition to gun control, the advocates of gun control. But if you can test this theory that the good guy with the gun can save or prevent the bad guy with the gun from committing, mass homicide, I think that would be a much better just thing to try at this point, based off of the political climate and also um, the spectrum of various arguments you'll see here and there. So, again, that's my position on what should be done. I doubt it will because politicians are just all over the place now. They don't really have much thought for themselves. Just take money from their corporate donors. That's another thing. So, I appreciate all those who have come. And again, I will have something else tomorrow. So, thank you.